Hello, my friend. This is Clyde. In his presence. Psalm 139 verse 7 to 10 says, "Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me, your right hand will hold me fast." Let us talk about the presence of God, a concept that is much bigger than we can exhaust in one conversation. God reveals himself in many different ways, but there are some specifics that we can learn about his presence. One thing that we can learn from the text is that God is everywhere. He is omnipresent. The writer uses his human understanding to convey to us that anywhere you go, God is there. Not that he shows up after you show up, because that would cancel what we're saying about him. Rather, it means that God is there before you get there, he is there while you are there, and he is there after you leave there, because that's simply who he is. His presence is everywhere. But what can we expect, or what are some of the manifest ways that we can know that God is present? God's presence can sometimes be identified by sound. You can hear his presence. You know what I'm talking about. As a child, there were times when you were doing something wrong and suddenly you heard a sound, a familiar sound, a sound that you did not want to hear at that time. It's a sound that tells you, my parent is near. In Genesis 3 verse 8, we read, "Then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God as he was walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and they hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden." Adam and Eve had done something wrong, the first time since they were made. Well, it seems as if they used to have special moments when God would visit them. So on this occasion, they heard a familiar sound. God was there walking in the garden. God's presence showed up, and they recognized him by the sound. God will sometimes show up in your life, my friend, and you cannot see anything, but you hear a sound. There is a reason why God shows up at that point. Be ready to welcome the presence of God rather than hide from the presence of God. God's presence brings peace and joy. Let us take peace first. In John 20:19-20, we read, "On the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together, with the doors locked for fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came and stood among them and said, 'Peace be with you.' After he said this, he showed them his hands and side. The disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord." This was the day when Jesus rose from the grave, and his disciples were hiding in a locked room because they feared that the Jewish leaders would come for them and execute them too, because they were Jesus' followers. So imagine the door was shut, locked, sealed, and suddenly Jesus was in the room. Slow it down. The doors were locked tight and nobody opened the door. So how did he come in? God's presence cannot be kept outside. And so on this occasion, when he appeared, they were scared out of their wits. And in that moment, Jesus said, "Peace be with you." Wow. Sometimes we are in difficult situations, really troublesome situations. In those moments, God can show up and bring calm to your troubled situations. When God shows up, he releases peace over the atmosphere. That is God's presence for you. But on that occasion, his presence also brought joy. They were so glad to see him. They were so glad to experience his presence. Now that he is here, they don't have to worry. They don't have to be fearful. David also discovered that God's presence produces joy. We read in Psalm 16 verse 11, "You will show me the path of life. In your presence is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore." Did you hear that? When you're in his presence, it is delightful. It is full of joy, indescribable joy. You have been away for a few days on business, and then you come home. Your dog hears your voice and comes running to where you are. The scene is indescribable. That dog is overjoyed, jumps all over you. His tail is wagging at 150 miles an hour. You and your dog hug and roll on the floor, and he simply cannot contain his joy. When you're in the presence of the Lord, it generates that kind of exuberance, joy that can only be felt, not described. Some people cry, some people dance, some people sing, some people just sit there in awe, speechless. I'm in the presence of the Lord. In Mark 5, verses 1 through 17, we read a different experience. Jesus met a man who was possessed with thousands of demons. When that man saw Jesus, he was confused, he was mad, he was uncomfortable. It wasn't the man so much, but the demons in the man. What happens to demons when the presence of God shows up? Whoa! Demons tremble, demons run, demons are confused because the presence of God, who is mightier than demons, is present, and that spells trouble for them. On that occasion, my friend, Jesus drove them out of the man. The presence of God resulted in them finding someplace else to go, but now that the presence of God has showed up, they had to vacate the scene. So what? I am glad you asked, my friend, because I want to tell you, you should desire his presence. You should make it your business to experience and enjoy and benefit from his presence. Things happen when his presence is present. Healing, blessings, security. Moses once told God that if his presence was not going with them to the promised land, then we are not going anywhere. God's presence is key. Vital. It's the best that you can experience. Today, I hope you get into his presence. Do you want to share your experience with me? Write me at friendofclyde@gmail.com.